All right, I'm going to go ahead and start this program to give everybody a chance to participate and make sure you have your full time to talk, because I know there's going to be a great discussion. So hello and welcome to the author panel. I hope you're having a wonderful conference and are hearing new ideas to implement at your library. As a member of ARSL, this conference is very special to me because it focuses directly on small and rural libraries. This conference is unique in that it recognizes the many roles that small libraries play in their communities and the many roles that librarians have, from changing the trash to paying the bills. I want to say thank you to the platinum sponsor of the day, Biblioteca. Thanks to our program sponsor, United for Libraries. And I also want to send a reminder out to all of you that ALA recently announced a $2 million grant to small and rural libraries to address issues of concern in their community. This Libraries Transforming Community grants are in the amount of $3,000 each, and up to 650 awards will be given. You have until December 2nd to apply for the Libraries Transforming Communities grant. For this session, fabulous authors are joining us, and Donna Seaman will moderate the discussion. As way of introduction for Donna, Donna is editor for adult books for Booklist. She is also a member of the content leadership team for the American Writers Museum and the recipient of the Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award and the Louis Schwartz Award for Excellence in Book Reviewing. Her author interviews are collected in Writers on the Air Conversations about books, and she is the author of Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists. Please join me in giving ARSL welcome to our authors and Donna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Holly. I really appreciate that. And thank you, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be part of the conference and representing Booklist. You'll see our last slide for the day is a special Booklist subscription offer for everyone who's attending the conference today, so watch for that. I also want to thank the publishers who brought us this exciting trio of authors. I want to thank HarperCollins, Hachette, and Penguin Random House. I'm going to introduce each of our authors first, and then I'm going to ask them a question, and we're going to go around and ask each questions in turn. I'd like to encourage all of you out there in the audience to use the Q&A box to submit some questions for Nadine, Joe, and Melanie. And we will be checking those and try to incorporate them in the conversation. So let's begin with Londoner Nadine Matheson. Nadine has always been entranced by storytelling, and crime fiction has always been her favorite genre. And this is fitting, given that Nadine is a criminal solicitor, or attorney, as we say in the US. Nadine won the City University Crime Writing Competition and completed an MA in Distinction in Creative Writing with a focus on crime writing. Her first crime novel is a serial killer thriller. Say that fast. It's titled The Jigsaw Man, and it is due out in March of 2021. This book launches a crime novel series, which has been optioned for television. Congratulations, Nadine.
Thank you.
I'm going to introduce Joe Ide. Joe is here to talk about Smoke, book number 5 in his spectacularly popular IQ crime series featuring Isaiah Quintabe. Joe grew up in South Central Los Angeles, earned a graduate degree, taught, worked in business, consulting and human resources, had success as a screenwriter, and then found his true calling, writing crime. He circled back to his childhood passion for Sherlock Holmes and his deep knowledge of Los Angeles neighborhoods, which is where IQ and some of the other novels are set. IQ, the first in the series, won the Anthony Award for Best First Novel, the McCavity Award for Best First Mystery, and the Shamus Award for Best First PI Novel. IQ was followed by Righteous, Wrecked, and High Five, and all received starred reviews in Booklist. Watch for a review of Smoke. It will be out in February. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And hi, so glad you're here. And now I'm going to introduce Melanie Benjamin, and I'm going to begin. Melanie's a best-selling historical novelist, but I'm going to go back to her childhood in Indianapolis, where she, and I quote, was the proud winner 2 years in a row for her hometown library's summer reading program. I love that. This grounding in literature propelled Melanie to become a writer. Her compelling and beloved historical and biographical novels illuminating women's lives include The Aviator's Wife, the autobiography of Mrs. Tom Thumb, The Girls in the Picture, and Alice I Have Been. Melanie's powerful forthcoming novel, The Children's Blizzard, is due out in January, which is apt. Thank you for being here today, Melanie.
My pleasure.
So, great. All right, we're going to go around Nadine, Joe, Melanie. So Nadine, here's your first question.
Okay.
The Jigsaw Man is the start of a series. It's the start of a series featuring Detective Inspector Angelica Henley. Who or what inspired Henley? And how is she both part of the grand sleuth tradition and a departure from it?
Oh, you asked really good questions. So thank you for having me, firstly. Well, what inspired me to write Angelica Henley is that so I've been reading crime fiction since, oh God, since maybe 12 or 13. I still absolutely love it. James Ellroy is my favourite crime writer. But for me, I said I'd never seen a black female detective in any crime fiction books that I've ever read. So for me, that was the main inspiration for me, to have someone who basically looked like me, effectively fighting crime. And so I work as a criminal attorney, and so I've been doing that for 15 years. So in my working life, I've seen black female detectives in practice, but I've never actually seen them in fiction. So that was mainly my inspiration for her. And how she's part of the sleuth tradition. I think she's that classic detective. She's smart, she's intuitive, she knows how to pursue a case, and literally she will cross the line, a fine line, to make sure she solves that case. But she's a mother, she's a wife, she's got a complex family life. So there's all these issues. I think she's the sort of person who wants to have it all, but she doesn't want to compromise anything. So that's what makes her slightly different to the classic detective. But she's fantastic. I think she's great.
Thank you so much, Nadine. I have to say it was a bit of a shock to find out that she's a mother.
Yes, she is.
All right, we'll talk more.
Okay.
We'll talk more about Jigsaw Man. Okay, Joe, you introduced your unusual and irresistible, unlicensed and underground LAPI, IQ, or Asaya, in your first novel. Smoke is the Fifth. Can you talk about Isaiah's origins, his personality, and what has propelled his evolution over 5 novels?
His origins came from my growing up. As you said, I grew up in South Central LA, in an area that was full of crime and gangs and all the inherent problems of the hood. My grandparents lived in that area because it was close to Little Tokyo. My parents lived with them because we were just getting by. My grandparents were very old world. They spoke almost no English. They were stern, they were formal, and very traditional. My grandmother had a koi pond, and my grandfather collected samurai swords. And they treated me like somebody else's cat. You know what I mean? Like they couldn't kill me, but they didn't have to be nice to me either. My parents, they wanted to be Brady Bunch mainstream, and that's what they wanted for their kids, me and my brothers. But we'd adapted to the neighborhood. Most of our friends were black, so we co-opted their speech and style, attitudes, musical tastes, all of that. And what resulted is all this is a kind of culture clash, within my family. And my parents and my grandparents, they wanted us to have some connection to our own cultural heritage. But, we'd adapted to our own environment. And they tried doing this, and it never really came out the way they wanted. My brother, Jack, he was kicked out of a Japanese Boy Scout troop for buying his merit badges. He didn't really, get into the whole spirit of the Boy Scouts, And, you know, the sort of sum total of this was I was culturally all over the place. You know, I wasn't black, I wasn't white, and I didn't feel anywhere close to being Japanese. And now I just grew up with sort of a no ethnicity. I was really, really colorblind. And that, when it came time to write a novel, you know, all of that came together almost by itself, along with Sherlock Holmes. And I ended up with Sherlock in the Hood. Mostly what Isaiah is intelligent. And I wanted to create a hero that didn't find justice at the end of a gun. And I wanted someone who was compassionate, who was fair, who thought about his community. And he also has all the requisite detective skills. So he's been sort of my alter ego. You know, he's quick, he's resourceful, he's smart, he has all of these skills, all the things that I don't have. And so that's the origins of him. And that's why his personality is the way it is.
Thank you. We'll get back to Isaiah. So Melanie, for you, I was struck by what a leap the children's blizzard is. It's very different, especially because your previous novel, Mistress of the Ritz, was set in Parisian luxury. You now bring us out into the Nebraska prairie, very rough lives. You also have written about real life figures before in your novels. This is more sort of an ensemble cast, although there are two sisters that are kind of, it's pegged to. I wonder if you could talk about what inspired this big change in your work.
Well, in short, the whole genre of biographical fiction, which I think I'm one of the first who kind of started that genre back in 2010, has gotten very, very crowded, and I wasn't inspired any longer by, I couldn't find anyone to write about in this way that was inspiring to me. There was no one left. And also I felt like, you know, it was time for a little change. I need a little more spark in my writing, a little inspiration. So I love historical fiction. I'm never not going to write historical fiction, but I certainly had been thinking, well, let's take a real event that is an unknown story and let me invent the characters around this actual event that happened. And for the first time, I've long wanted to write about the homesteading experience, the immigrant experience, because that's half of my Ancestry.com family tree. We're immigrants from Germany to the Great Plains in the late 1800s. And this is where I grew up in the Midwest. So it's close to my heart in that way. And as that little girl in the library reading programs, certainly the Little House on the Prairie books were many of my favorite books, and I loved them, but you know, they only hinted at some of the real gritty challenges of the immigrant experience in the 1800s, of homesteading on the plains. We tend to look at that time period through very rose-colored glasses. And I thought this great story that really happened on January 12th, 1888, and it is called the Children's Blizzard because so many of the victims were children, school children, because the schools were letting out at that time, was a great way to kind of explore a little more realistic version of Little House on the Prairie and honor my ancestors and just tell a really great story.
Thank you so much. It's very dramatic. We'll get back to that. I love these different settings. Nadine, in the Jigsaw Man, hope Nadine can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, good. Oh, the Zoom delay. It's so much fun.
I know, I can hear you.
Great. So Joe was talking about how growing up in South Central Los Angeles inspired the setting for his crime fiction. I think that you do the same for a neighborhood in London in the Jigsaw Man. I wonder if you would talk about that place and why you chose to write about it.
Yeah, I did exactly the same as Joe. So the Jigsaw Man is set in an area called Deptford in southeast London, and that's the area where I grew up from, literally as a baby, straight through to being an adult. And I would describe Deptford, southeast London, it's a complete mix of people. So yeah, people from the West Indian communities, African communities, I'll say even say the native Englishmen are there, Italians, Chinese, everyone's a complete mix of people. So the demographic is really wide. And the River Thames is literally was behind my house. And growing up, that was where we'd go and play, even though we weren't supposed to. So we'd go and play by the river. And there would be times when the river would just throw up so many different things. So it would literally throw up, apart from tires, it actually throw up and dead animals. And we saw bodies being fished out of the river. So all of that's always stuck in my mind. And I always thought that would be a good place to set a story. And then obviously when you grow up in an area and with gentrification, I've seen how much it's changed. But really, you can put up all the lovely restaurants and big glamorous apartment buildings. I've seen all of that, but there's still an underbelly that's there, and you can't gloss over that. So I wanted to show all of that in the Jigsaw Man. I kind of call the Jigsaw Man as being like my love letter to the area, a very macabre love letter, but it's my love letter to the area in which I grew up. So I said that was my main inspiration, and I felt like that area of London hadn't been seen in the British crime novels. So you'll see London, but it might be the actual city, like the financial district, or it may be the north part of London, or you may see maybe the rest of England, but you never see that southeast part of England. And it's got so much history and so much diversity, and I wanted to show that in the Jigsaw Man, but also have a serial killer running through it. I've never represented a serial killer in my life, but I thought I would love to have represented a serial killer. So I thought, what would it be like if there was a couple of serial killers running through southeast London in my area? So that's what was inspired me, and hopefully I did it justice in the Jigsaw Man.
Yes, the setting is extremely vivid, and yes, macabre is the word. So, Joe, we're coming back to you and your sleuth. I was interested in the great array of crimes that you, dramatize in each novel, and I'm wondering what this is based on. Do you research this? Is it just headlines, stories you hear? Where does all this nefarious activity come from?
No, part of it is that I spend too much time by myself. I have a lot of time to make stuff up. I want the bad guy to be formidable. I want him to be a real serious challenge. I mean, a detective is sort of defined by their opponents. So I always want somebody smart, even if it's not IQ points, if it's cunning. I want a world where I can take the reader that they may not have thought about before, or they may not have been there before, but I need a world. And I try to get specific within that world and bring some authenticity to it. Part of the criminals come from people that I knew, who have particular attitudes and a certain kind of evilness even. And who have a penchant for crime, or at least doing illegal things. There were a lot of people in my background, and so I can take those attitudes and exaggerate them. The other thing is, I try and make each bad guy really specific in terms of being a character. You know, I take great pains in giving them a particular way to speak, for example. You know, their word choices, vocabulary, syntax, all of that. So I take a great deal of time creating bad guys. As for research, I don't really like research. You know, I want to get on with it. So I will research for specific answers, and I go in and then I get out. You know, the trick is you have to know what question you're trying to answer. And so that's sort of my approach to bad guys.
That's great, thank you. That's good advice for a novelist. You can really fall down the proverbial rabbit holes with research. Melanie, let's go back to the Great Plains. I was intrigued by all your characters, but as I mentioned earlier, there's two sisters that kind of hold the story together, and I don't want to give too much away, but I wonder if you could talk about Reina and Gerda Olsen, how you created them, and they're both still in their teens, and yet they're teachers responsible for these humble schoolhouses in the prairie.
Yeah, that's what struck me so much when I was researching this. It is called the Children's Blizzard because a lot of the victims were school children, but truly the school teachers who had to make life and death decisions in an instant were children themselves. You know, we have the image of the prairie school marm, and, you know, she's a beautiful young woman. They were 15 and 16-year-old girls leaving home for the first time to board out. And it was a very, very hard thing, I think, to do. And in an instant, on this particular day, January 12th, 1888, like I said, they had to make these life and death decisions. So I thought it would be really interesting to explore. As I was creating these characters, I read, there's a wonderful account of the oral histories of those who survived the storm. And some of the school teachers in the aftermath of the storm kind of became media sensations for the day, that the newspapers latched on to some of these beautiful young women who had become heroines of the storm, and there were songs written about them, and you know, donations taken up for them, and they received proposals of marriage. But yet there were also young women who weren't heroines of the storm, who did make the wrong decision. So I thought, let's have two sisters be school teachers in different parts of the area that was affected. One is in the Dakota territory, one is in Nebraska, who make two different decisions and see how their lives played out because of that. And they're very, very different trajectories. And some victims of the storm, they didn't die immediately, that there were people suffering from the storm decades and decades after it was over. And that's what I wanted to do with Gerda and Reina. And I also came to learn that the victims of the prairie, that the children of the prairie, the children of these homesteaders, whether they were these young women, again, boarding out at 15 and 16, leaving home to teach school, to help with the farm, or whether it was the sons who were yoked to the land because of the decisions that their parents had made in leaving home, leaving Norway, leaving Germany, and crossing an ocean, you know, for the home, to get a homestead through the Homestead Act. They yoked these children to the ground, to the earth, a punishing, unforgiving earth for generations and generations to come. The Okies of the Dust Bowl are children of the immigrants that I write about in the Children's Blizzard. And so I really found it kind of fascinating to explore. When we're talking about the children, the victims of the storm, I also kind of thought that it was apt to explore how, you know, generations of children, again, were really tied to a really punishing earth, a really terrible environment because of the decisions that their parents had made.
So interesting that we're all talking about difficult environments and what it does to people, whether it's urban or out in the country. We don't usually think of the country that way. Very interesting. Nadine, I'm coming back to you.
Yeah.
I was so struck by Inspector Henley's struggles with, I guess you would call her work-home life balance. Mm-hmm. I thought that, we talked about this a little bit, I thought that was so interesting. And right at the start, you have her say, to tell the reader, not for the first time, she wonders what it said about her that she was happier dealing with rapists and murderers than her own husband. Could you talk a little bit about Henley's style, her combination of humor and intensity?
It's only when I hear it, it just makes me laugh, because it's just the strangest thing for someone to say as a person, that you would rather deal with the worst of society than deal with your actual own family. I don't even know what to say about it. But in terms of Henley, I think she's the sort of woman who, she clearly knows what she wants. She wants her career, she wants to be the wife, and she wants to be the mother, but she doesn't want to compromise who she is as a person. So I think that is clear. But I also don't think she understands what it is to maybe be a wife and be a mother. And she's so reluctant to give anything up of her professional life in order to give 100% to those two roles. And her relationship with her husband, it's a bit precarious. She kind of, without giving away spoilers, she kind of married him as a bit of a safety net, something to give her a bit of stability away from the craziness, I suppose, of pursuing serial killers and other criminals. But it's not, I don't think it's really what she wants. And there's this battle, I suppose, because she's gone through so much trauma in her life, and that's just in regards to her career. Obviously, her husband wants her to, take a step back and think about the bigger picture, but she's not prepared to do that because she's stubborn. She's very stubborn. She doesn't want to be told what to do. So in her mind, dealing with a rapist, dealing with a murderer, that's very straightforward. They've committed a crime. She can deal with that. She's very analytical in regards to that side of her life. But in terms of dealing with her emotions, she's compartmentalized them, but she's literally stuck them all in a steel box and is refusing to deal with it. So, I mean, that is her personal struggle. But in terms of her, and I think also she probably feels that she relates in a sense to that relationship that she probably has with a criminal. So, for example, with the serial killer, Peter Olivier, in the book, she kind of has an understanding with him. Much as she hates to admit it, she does understand him, and I think she kind of enjoys that interaction. She probably gets a rush from that interaction with him, and that probably says a lot about her, that she enjoys interacting more with a serial killer than sitting down and talking about Sunday dinner with her husband and her in-laws.
Yes, something all workaholics can relate to, I think.
Yeah. She likes work.
Likes work. Joe, coming back to you, I wanted to talk about some of the other characters in your series. Thinking of 1L Dodson, who sort of is Isaiah's Watson.
Yes,
he's a very intriguing character. Could you talk a little about him and the dynamic between those two?
Dodson is an ex-hustler, and he retains some of those qualities, a lot of those qualities. He's slick, he's opportunistic, terribly self-involved, and he's argumentative, he's belligerent. And I wanted conflict between Isaiah and his sidekick. I didn't want the sidekick, who was always in awe and wondering how things happen. I wanted him to really butt heads with Isaiah. And the adage is true. I mean, conflict is story, story is conflict. And that was one of sort of the mechanical reasons why he has that personality. I also wanted to pit someone who is as straight-laced as IQ, as moral and ethical as IQ, with someone who is not so moral and not so straight. I think that the way they handle their arguments, their conflicts, also defines their character. You can see how they approach each other and the arguments they use, who they are. And the other thing is, I don't have an outline. I don't have a template. I write wherever Dodson and Isaiah lead me, and they're fun. They're really fun to write. And I wanted the characters to grow from book to book. That was one of the things I wanted to do from the beginning, and to keep them changing, to keep them confronting new problems like we all do, and it keeps it fresh for me. Now, I wonder myself, like Dodson suddenly has a baby, and what is this ex-hustler going to do with a baby and that enormous responsibility? These things intrigue me because when I start, I don't know, and it's one of the things that really I think propels the book forward. That they're constantly dealing with new problems.
That's great. That answers some other questions too, that you don't have an outline. I think that gives that organic freshness to your stories. Melanie, I'm going to ask you about another character in your novel. There's a theme throughout, and you alluded to it when we were speaking a few minutes ago, about drawing all the immigrants to the Great Plains. So there's a lot of really sharp social commentary in this very dramatic novel, including this idea that people were duped, that there was a lot of fake news about come to the promised land to farm, it's all going to be great, and that really the weather and the earth are very harsh. You have a newspaper man, Gavin Woodson, who he's kind of the funnel for all this. And I wonder if you could sort of talk about this, who was behind the fake news campaign and who Gavin is.
Yeah, I love Gavin. He may be my favorite character in this book because this is the most redemptive arc. I was fascinated. So I was fascinated in researching this to find out, and again, this is not what we're taught in school when we talk about this time period, that there were fake news stories deliberately planted in newspapers in Norway, in Germany, in Sweden, in the cities, the newspapers of New York and the bigger cities in the East, because by the boosters, the railroad boosters. So the Transcontinental Railroad had just been finished. So we had this great railroad connecting the entire country. The people who did that needed to make money from it. In order for that to happen, they needed towns, they needed people writing on it, they needed goods and goods being shipped back and forth on it. The territories of the time needed white people to settle there to become states. So there were all these boosters from the railroads, from the governments, from the city boosters who needed, again, unfortunately, needed white people to come. They didn't count the Native Americans whose land it had been. They didn't really count Black Americans, freed slaves at the time. They needed white people to settle this. So they hired people like Gavin Woodson to write these fake news stories depicting Nebraska and Dakota and Iowa and Minnesota as this veritable Garden of Eden, where the weather was mild and the sun shone all the time and the winters were so, delightful, and the ground would grow anything you planted. And that was absolutely not the truth. I mean, this is the era of the grasshoppers raining from the sky and eating all the crops. This is a period that was known as the Little Ice Age because the winters were so severe, which got this horrible blizzard in 1888. The dry farming methods weren't known at the time, so those who came from Northern Europe did not know how to grow in this very, very punishing landscape. And so I really thought Gavin's voice was very important to this because he starts out as a very jaded kind of newspaperman exiled to God-forsaken Omaha, as he calls it. And yet on the day of the blizzard, he has an encounter that changes his mind a little bit, and then the blizzard completely changes his heart. He starts out as seeing these immigrants not as people, but just simply numbers, rubes he has deceived through the power of his pen, and he ends up seeing them as people. And he redeems himself by telling their stories in the aftermath of the blizzard. And so I really thought his was an important perspective, and because in Gerda and Reina you have the kind of victims of their environment, but in Gavin you have the manipulator, you have the seedier side. You see why people needed these immigrants and why they really weren't very welcome when they got here, other than just for bodies to settle a land. It's an immigrant story. It's a very different immigrant story than the story than what we witness today. There are very many differences, but there are some similarities. And again, we tend to kind of look at it through through this hazy, this is what America is. But the immigrants weren't really welcome then either, except in sheer numbers.
Thank you so much. It's absolutely a fascinating aspect of the novel, truly. I'm looking at audience questions as we go around again. And I have a nice general question from an attendee. So we'll start with Nadine, and then I'll ask each of you this question. This person just wonders, what authors inspire you?
Oh God.
What do you think?
And I said, well, I mentioned it earlier, James Ellroy. I said, I've read American Tabloid. I was working in a bookshop when I was at university, so I worked part-time in a bookshop, and I read James Ellroy, And I remember thinking, I want to write crime fiction, but I'll never be able to write as good as James Ellroyd. And American Tabloid, that's the one book I think that completely inspired me. And I love Michael Connelly as well. I just read Fair Warning, which was his last one, which is fantastic. What else do I like? I've got also the British one, so Mark Billingham, who has Tom Thorne as a detective. So I read the classic detective fictions, I would say. But then I have my moments when you can't see the rest of this office, but I have a ridiculous comic book collection. So I love my comics. So when I'm not reading crime fiction, I'll be reading comic books. But that's what inspires me.
I can see a little touch of that in the Jigsaw Man, actually.
Yeah,
you might see
you might see a bit of the Joker, maybe, in there somewhere if you look for him.
Joe, how about you? Thank you so much. Joe, some authors that inspire you? We heard about the Sherlock Holmes stories. Any other titles?
Aside from Sherlock Holmes, yeah.
Yes.
Walter Mosley is one. I mean, he writes about my neighborhood. And I was very uncertain about writing about my neighborhood and the people in it. And so he gave me permission to write about what I wanted to write about. I figured if he could find an audience, maybe I could find an audience too. The other was Elmore Leonard, because he wrote the kinds of books I wanted to write. And I guess the third would be John le Carré. Spy novels are just detective novels in another country. And he writes with such precision and with such care, and he is so insightful all the time. It's embedded in his writing, and I really admired that, envied that even, his attention to detail. So yeah, those are the three authors that I think were most influential.
Yes, I can really see that. Detail, all of you are masters of detail. Melanie, what writers would you like to name?
Well, I think when I was considering writing historical fiction about an actual event but made up characters around it, I would say E.L. Doctorow. His novel The March is one of my, I think, probably the best historical novel I've ever read. It's about Sherman's march to the sea. So obviously there are actual historical characters in that, as there are somewhat in mine, but then he invents characters around it. So that kind of was an inspiration for me for this. Obviously I read a lot of Willa Cather to get that sense of Nebraska, of the Great Plains, and she has a different viewpoint than the one I'm coming at. She writes very lovingly. She was a child of that place, and I'm writing a little more harshly because both things are true. And I would say for contemporary authors, one of my very favorites is Maggie O'Farrell, and her most recent book, Hamnet, that just came out. Oh, probably the best book I've read this year. I really loved it.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. We have more audience questions. I'm happy to report. We'll go around, and this is an interesting, almost technical question. The question is, what's your editing process? And Nadine, we're coming back to you. Do you edit as you write? Do you write and then edit? How do you deal with revisions?
Oh no, I write and then edit. If I edit as I went along, I'd never finish a book. So I do. I'll still be here now. I'll probably do and work on the Jigsaw Man. So I will finish the first draft, and then when I've done maybe the second or third draft, then I go back and start editing. If I was to do it the other way around, I said I'll be sitting there forever, because you can always find something to fix. And if you're continuously going back, I'll just be trying to perfect a sentence or a paragraph endlessly, and I wouldn't be making any progress. So no, I make sure I finish it, and then I'd go back to it.
Joe, how about you? Do you edit as you write, or do you go back to rewrite?
I'm with Nadine. I edit at the end, and when I approach rewriting, it's with two questions. One is, what's wrong? What doesn't work? What shouldn't be here? What could be, what could be better? That's actually the second question that I rewrite with, is what can be better? Can I make a sharper simile or dialogue, or is this word the most vivid word I can come up with? And, over the course of multiple drafts, you're refining everything, and you're asking yourself really thousands of questions. Like, is this the most vivid word? And I think this is sort of related to voice. I think that voice is, these decisions are cumulatively your voice, because no one else would make the same choices and decisions you would. And this assumes, of course, that you ask the thousands of questions in the first place, to make those choices. And I think both of my colleagues here would agree. It's if there's no rigor, there's no voice. And so that's a big part. It's a big part of it, is rewriting and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting.
Yes, it's often said there's really no writing, there's only rewriting. And I think it really is crucial. Melanie, how about you? What is your writing, editing process?
Same thing. I write that first draft and I just let it go. I call it like laying the tracks, right? I just tell the story every day. I have to move the story forward, move the story forward till I get to the end. I am not worrying about language. I'm not worrying, about. I know that a lot of the words that I write, I'm not going to use, but I don't worry about that because I know I always come out with better ones and different ones. So yeah, I write that whole first draft. I maybe let it sit for a couple weeks, and then I go back and then I start the process I truly love, which is the revision process. And that's where I feel I'm at my most creative. That's truly where I get to play with the language and pick and choose and rearrange words. And I might, just get rid of characters who don't work, or I might change the voice, or I might change, play with the point of view and all that stuff. But it's you have to, I do not obsess over every word when I'm writing that first draft. I am just simply trying to get the story on the page so then I can go back and polish it and play with it.
Thank you so much. Great question. Here's another interesting question for all of you, and we'll go back to Nadine. If you had to write in a different genre other than the genre you love, what would it be?
I already know the answer to this. I'm waiting for DC Comics to give me a call so I can just write any series. That's it. I'm very honest about my comic book love. So if it was any other genre, that would be it. I'll just write comic books for a living. So you never know. It could happen.
It could happen.
Yeah. Well, I'm putting out the signal. I keep putting out tweets on Twitter to DC, so maybe they'll pick up something.
We hope so. That would be exciting. Joe, how about you? If you weren't writing crime fiction, what would you like to be? What else would you try?
I think I would write adventure. I think I would write a story about someone who's going on a dangerous, unique adventure. I like pitting a character against situations that he or she has never experienced before. And it may not be a detective novel, but it's the same sort of thing with my detective novels. I want to continually put big problems in front of the character and to see how he or she would solve them. And as a writer, how am I going to solve it? I think, writers write themselves into corners for a reason, because it challenges them to come up with a really different, unique solution. Otherwise, the readers could figure it out, and it would be boring. So it would be adventure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And Melanie, if you weren't writing historical fiction, what would you write?
a lot of different things. I think I've always wanted to write a Western, and I love Larry McMurtry. I would love to write a Western. Paula Giles is one of my favorite authors right now, and I love her books. But unfortunately, my publisher's never really been on board with that. This is the closest I've gotten to come. So a Western. I also would love to do a sweeping generational family saga. You know, something along the lines of what like a James Michener used to write, or a Herman Wouk, or, you know, the Thornbirds kind of a thing. I think I would really love to try my hand on that maybe someday.
That's great. Okay, Nadine, I'm going to ask you about the challenge of launching a series. Like, how far ahead have you thought out the series?
At the moment, I think I planned up to book 4. So I'm currently working on, so I'm currently working on book 2. Because I'm a planner. I can't, if I was to just pants it, I wouldn't, I'll probably get to 30,000 words and then I wouldn't know what my characters are doing, where they're going. I mean, Henley would just be stuck in the kitchen for months if I didn't plan a book. So I'm working on book 2 in the series now. I've kind of outlined book 3, and book 4. I have an idea for book 4. So I have longevity in the series, and I'm enjoying it actually, because even when I'd left book 1 aside for so long, when it was off being with my editor, that when I came and then I started book 2, probably like 6 months later. And when I started book 2, I was like, I'm so happy to see Henley removed. I was like, oh, hello, how are you? It's nice to see you. And I think when you have that passion, and I feel that way for all of my characters, because in the Jigsaw Man, in that series, they're part of a unit, which I've called the Serial Crime Unit. So they're a very close-knit team. And I think that comes through in the Jigsaw Man. So coming back to that team and being like part of that team myself, it was, I enjoyed seeing them. So as long as I've got that passion for them and want to continue their journey, which is why I've kind of given them issues. Everyone's got some kind of issue. So as long as they continue to have challenges, it gives the reader, I think, a reason to carry on and continue and return back to the stories.
Yes, issues abound.
Loads.
Very well done.
They all need therapy, everyone.
So Joe, you're sort of, you're into a series that's been very successful. And I noticed in the books that in the first book, IQ, people really loved the humor. There was quite a lot of wit. And I have to say that the series has gotten less comedic as it's gone on. And Isaiah, of course, has grown a lot, and a lot has happened as Smoke begins. And I don't want to give anything away, but I wonder if you could talk about why the tone changed. Was that deliberate or just kind of inevitable? You could talk a little bit about that evolution.
Like most of my writing, it wasn't deliberate. It got darker because I don't have a template. I'm following the characters through the stories, and wherever that goes, it goes. If it's darker, it's darker. If it's more humorous, then that's fine. I don't measure ingredients. If I did, it would be the tail wagging the dog. High Five did turn darker, but then Smoke, the one coming out in February, is much lighter. There's much more humor in it. Half the book is humor, and that's just where that story went. And I don't try and balance anything. It hamstrings me. I write what's in front of me, and the question is, to me, is sort of this is not a great word, but honesty. Would the character do this in this situation? And if I can really tell myself, yes, the character would do this in this situation, then on I go.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Makes perfect sense. And series are they're living, creative adventures over a long time, so readers should expect them to change. I think maybe when series go wrong is when they're too rigid, when they're not open to evolution and change. So it's very challenging either way. Yeah. So Melanie, I have a question for you from someone in the audience. They wonder if there's another historical event or another person that you have wanted to write about or have thought about writing about.
Yeah, a lot of them. I have a whole file full of ideas that I have wanted to write about. And I don't want to share anyone that I think I might actually write about at this point. You know, and it's kind of true that, again, there's so many historical novelists doing, you know, right now that we're kind of protective of who I want to write about or what I want to write about because I don't want somebody else to jump on it before I get to it. I would say, but I'll tell you one that I tried really, really hard to make work. I wrote a whole book, and then my editor and I ultimately decided it just didn't work, and we just didn't publish it. And that was about Rose Kennedy. I really wanted to write a novel about her, and I found that that was a challenge I was not up to. I could not make this woman work. I couldn't get inside her skin. I couldn't see the world the way she saw it. I couldn't. You just didn't want to spend a whole book with her. Sometimes that has happened. I have had subjects in mind, and I have written a couple of entire books in the last few years that, again, ultimately I made the decision not to publish because I decided that that person perhaps maybe deserved a short story instead of an entire novel. And sometimes, you know, you can get a great idea like that and you will ultimately decide, well, this really didn't make a novel. So I've had those experiences in the past with Rose Kennedy in particular. And yeah, I have some ideas for the future, and maybe I can't really share them yet. But again, I'm always looking for great stories from history. Yeah.
That's very interesting. I'm always amazed when writers say that they write an entire book and just pitch it over. So,
you know, it's my choice, right? I've never felt that every word I write deserves to be published. I'm not that precious. Okay, you know, I can make mistakes even now. I can still learn even now, and I don't have, yeah, I'm not that precious about my writing. I always know I can come up with a better story. Yeah.
Really helpful to know that. Thank you. So Nadine, we were talking about how Henley can't balance her personal life and her work life. Are you still working as a criminal attorney? And if so, how is that matching up with writing about criminals?
No, I've taken a break from practicing, and also with COVID and lockdown, things are, well, basically everything had been shut down. But I teach criminal law at the law school, so that started up a couple of weeks ago, but that's all online. But you know, being a criminal attorney, and I've been doing that, I said, for over 15 years, it's the best dictionary. It's like the best reference library for crime fiction. And I said, my clients I've represented over the years, I mean, I've had people sit in front of me, swear blind that the person caught on closed circuit TV wasn't them and it was their twin brother. And really, then their mum's sitting next to them saying, he hasn't got a twin brother. He's like an only child. And then I've had clients who commit the most grandest of frauds and use, you know, dead people's identity. So like the whole reference library of characters through my work is, that's come through in so many of the different characters in the Jigsaw Man. So yeah, I still keep my toes in. There's no way I couldn't give up criminal law forever, because what would I refer to? What would I use as background? That's my research. That's definitely my research.
That's pretty amazing. Well, I would imagine teaching works well with writing. A lot of writers teach. So.
Yeah, it does, and it kind of keeps me back on track. And also, students always ask so many questions about the cases I've worked on. So I said, I'm a storyteller, so I love telling them stories as well, and that brings up lots of memories. And like, oh, I can use that in the next book.
That's great. That makes great sense. Joe, I have an audience question for you.
Sure.
And here it is. Will you ever write an autobiography to describe the culture clash of your family? Will you write
Probably,
nonfiction about your life?
probably not. I should have a better memory, but I don't. There's much of my growing up that are just blank spaces to me, and I don't really think that my growing up was especially unique. You know, these sort of multicultural growing up is pretty common, and I don't think anybody in my family was especially unique. I think you can find parallels all over the place. So no, I probably won't. And by the way, that's an impressive pile of books behind you.
Oh dear, that's a very kind word.
I see. I see. Organizing isn't a strong suit.
Correct. Yes, I do have some more organized shelves. My house is bursting with books, as you can imagine. So yes, all this Zoom time, I have never yet neaten those up. So thanks for making me laugh. Can't live without books. So we're nearing our end time, so I'm going to ask the last question. And we touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to, I guess I'll just ask a more open question than I had in mind, which is, what do you hope readers will take away from that deeply immersive experience of the Children's Blizzard, where you're giving us this completely new view of the Great Plains life?
That the school books did not tell us everything about the immigrant experience, but more importantly, that the human cost, whenever man decides he can tame nature or change the climate, has always been horrible, and it will continue to be horrible. Nature and the climate will always win, whether it was in 1888 or today. But that the human spirit, our ability to change and to learn and to forgive and to love, our resilience, and our ability to make amends even in the face of the most catastrophic disaster is what will save us in the end.
Well put. Thank you so much. That's a really wonderful note to end on, and boy, did that hour go fast. I want to thank the three of you so much for your eloquent conversation. I really appreciate it. And thank you to HarperCollins, Hachette, and Penguin Random House, and United for Libraries. I think we're going to have a slide up so I can talk about Booklist special issue for our subscribers. Let's see. Hannah's working on it. Yes, there we go. So, and again, you know, Booklist is published by the American Library Association, so we're not for profit. Our website has been free since March, but of course, like everyone else, we have to have some subscriptions. So new and returning subscribers can enjoy home and office delivery of Booklist and Book Links, our classroom magazine. You also get a single user access to all our digital resources, which are enormous. By subscribing, you will support our efforts to bring critical perspectives to book selection and reader's advisory based on over 115 years of experience. You can also find information about this author at the virtual booths for United for Libraries and ALA editions. On behalf of Booklist, I want to thank everyone, the audience participation. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. And thanks again to Melanie, Joe, and Nadine. And be well, everyone. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Nadine. It was great to meet you all.
Oh, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. I'm probably going to bed now because it's like 9:15 in the evening.
What time is it there for you?
9:15. But I think I'm going to watch the
Oh.
I want to watch the Comey Effect though, because that started tonight, so I might stay up and watch that.
Wow.
Thank you all for organizing this.
Yes, thank
Yeah,
you so much, Booklist.
fantastic.
Thank you, Donna,
It's quite
for
a feat.
your great questions. Wonderful questions, Donna.
Yes.
They were.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's
Thank you,
ultimately,
everyone. Thank you, Jaden, Hannah, and everyone behind the scenes, Jillian.
Yes, thanks all.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.